Let's move on to talk a bit about conditions that we have maybe heard of but don't know everything about, and see if we can find ways where diet can improve some of these conditions. So let's start with polycystic ovaries. Now, these are a really common cause of fertility difficulties in women, and PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is associated with less frequent ovulation and erratic periods. So your periods may be less regular than once a month, because you're ovulating less, you're producing less than one egg a month from your ovaries. It is also associated with weight gain and acne. And this is primarily because it's a condition fueled by insulin resistance, which is similar to type 2 diabetes. It's a multi-systems issue. And that insulin resistance can be one of the main drivers then for your issues with irregular periods. Now, what's interesting is that a high fiber diet can reduce your risk of side effects with PCOS. So if you reduce your high glycemic index foods, so reducing things like white flour, added sugars, and fizzy sugary drinks, then this will help to improve your insulin sensitivity. Exercising as well is very helpful, and reduced consumption of saturated fats and animal proteins is helpful as well. Women who have polycystic ovaries tend to have more receptors in their body for ages. Now, hopefully some of you might have read or learned from previous lectures what AGEs are. AGEs stand for advanced glycation end products, and they're proteins that have a sugar attached to them, and they're biomarkers that are associated with aging. So just remember that ages cause aging. But they are also present in meat and cheese and fried eggs, butter and cream, and fried and heavily processed foods, essentially junk foods. And when meat is cooked, it releases more AGEs, advanced glycation end products. And that is especially true for barbecued meats. So these foods are essentially going to be minimized if we want to reduce the oxidative stress caused by advanced glycation end products. Soy foods like tofu have been shown to improve polycystic ovarian syndrome. And one trial from 2018 compared a standard diet using animal protein versus soy protein, where the women were given the same amount of macronutrients. So the same amount of calories, the same amount of protein, the same amount of carbohydrates, and the same amount of fat. And what happened? The soy group had significantly reduced body weight, reduced waist circumference. They had reduced levels of insulin hormones, reduced levels of insulin resistant, and also reduced blood sugars and triglyceride fats in the body. So there was a number of very important health benefits associated with consuming soy protein instead of animal protein in the women that were in this trial. So let's move on and talk about another condition which is hormonally mediated, called endometriosis. Hopefully some of you have heard of endometriosis, because it's actually a really serious condition and many women don't realize that they have it. Now, what happens with endometriosis is that the tissue that lines the womb each month, that endometrial lining that we talked about earlier, can grow and bleed in other parts of the pelvis. So with endometriosis, this endometrial lining can actually be found in all sorts of places, even in the lungs and very rarely the brain, but most commonly it's found just within the pelvis. The problem that women face is that when they have their monthly period, that monthly bleeding can happen outside of the womb and in the pelvis elsewhere. As you can see from this image, if the bleeding happens outside the womb, it can irritate and inflame that tissue, causing the potential for severe period pain. It can even cause bowel loops to stick together. It can cause reduced fertility, and it can cause sort of painful sex as well. It can even result in the need for removal of some of the affected areas, or even in severe cases, a hysterectomy. So this is important because many women think, oh, I've just got period pain. Or even when they go to the doctor thinks, oh, it's just period pain. But if you're having extreme pain, painful sex, you're having nausea, you're having to take several days off work each month, then you really need to consider whether a diagnosis of endometriosis might be possible. Now, diagnosis, as I mentioned, can be difficult because essentially most people wait, or they sort of maybe go to the doctor and the doctor doesn't realize. And it takes on average 8 years for a woman with endometriosis to get her diagnosis. The best way of diagnosing it is through a laparoscopy, where you put a camera into the pelvis to look for some of these endometrial deposits. So why does it happen? Well, it is a disorder that is linked to estrogen excess, but we don't really know why it happens. So how do we help reduce endometriosis and its effects? Well, given that it's a diagnosis linked to excess estrogen, and as we discussed earlier, for period pain in general, a healthy plant-based diet may help. One study looked at the link between the consumption of red meat and chicken and the development of endometriosis. The women were followed up for 20 years and had their endometriosis confirmed by laparoscopy. This was really interesting, actually, because the effect of red meat was independent of the saturated fat that the women ate. And the researchers wondered whether heme iron could have played a part in that link. Also, exposures to phthalates is another important issue. It may be linked to endometriosis as well. And interestingly, foods containing phthalates, remember what I said about phthalates? They are contained within many types of plastic to help the durability and flexibility of the plastic. But exposure to phthalates may be most commonly found actually in fish from UK data and in chicken from US data. So with the consumption of fish and chicken, we may also be consuming phthalates, which could potentially increase our risk of other issues such as endometriosis. What about fibroids? Let's move on to fibroids, which is another sort of hormone-dependent condition that many women experience. So with fibroids, you have an internal muscle layer within the womb, which can then grow to form a lump, or we would call it a fibroid tumor. It's not the same as a cancer. So it doesn't cause a spread anywhere else in the body, and it shouldn't cause any other side effects. Now, the risk of fibroids increases with increasing estrogen exposures. Now, interestingly, having our periods starting younger than 11 years of age can increase the risk. And this is also why fibroids tend to reduce or shrink in size after the menopause. But you might not want to wait that long. So what do we need to know to help ourselves as well as seeing the doctor? Well, that there is a correlation between exposure to endocrine disruptors within our fat cells and increased fibroid risk. So it's those pesky plastics again. Losing weight also can help by reducing the size of the fat cells that store these compounds, as well as by reducing the amount of estrogen made by fat storage cells. Fibroid lumps are associated with beef and ham consumption. One study showed green vegetables and citrus fruits are thought to be protective. Now, we only have observational studies at this point, and I do think really that more research should be done. But from what has been shown so far, drinking alcohol has also been linked to fibroids, as well as stress and reduced physical activity. So when we think about the changes that we want to make to our own lifestyles, we think about getting a bit more movement in our day, drinking less alcohol, limiting beef and ham consumption, and maximizing veggies and citrus fruits consumption as ways to help ourselves as well. Now, I do want to touch on fertility, because this is an important part of our hormonal symphony. And also because the stress of being unable to have a baby when you desperately want to is one of life's greatest griefs. So I thought I would just do that a little bit of justice by mentioning it here. I know it's not part of the talk, but it is hormonally mediated in some people. And as I mentioned, there's lots of reasons why pregnancy can be hard to achieve. But for some couples, PCOS or fibroids or endometriosis can play a part in not being able to conceive. Also, stress can play a big part. So I do love to make a real emphasis with my patients on how important it is to seek meaning and joy and love from other things in your lives whilst you're on a fertility journey. I've actually seen countless couples give up on having a baby after failed fertility treatments, only to then fall pregnant when they least expected it. And I'm thinking that perhaps that's because the tension around creating life has gone and the joy of sex has returned. But I thought it was worth mentioning here in this section that maintaining a healthy weight can be important for fertility. Being overweight can stimulate some of these issues that we've talked about and increase the risk of things like PCOS or fibroids. But also, I want to mention being too slim can mean that your body cannot sustain the marathon of a pregnancy and childbirth. And your periods can be disrupted if you're not meeting your body's energy needs or if you're over-exercising. So, many people who are enjoying a whole foods plant-based diet, they want to be super healthy, but they may be, in some cases, finding that their periods are becoming less regular. And they need to really look at that and say, okay, something's going on with my hormone balance here. It may be that I actually need to reduce the amount of exercising that I do, or actually I need to increase the amount of healthy fats that I'm consuming. So it's not just advice for people to lose weight. Some people may need to gain weight. So it's important just to look at your own individual needs around this and see where you might need to put your focus. Right, let's have a look. The next thing I wanted to touch on is sperm counts. Now, I'm sure it's probably mostly women who are interested to join me for this lecture, but there may be some men amongst you who would be interested to know a bit more about how to maintain your sperm counts. Now, if you have been diagnosed with a low sperm count, your doctor will advise you on the severity or whether fertility treatments might be needed. But I thought it would be worth adding a small section here on things that you can do yourself to maximize your sperm count. Now, vigorous exercise helps fertility for men and for women, so long as they maintain a healthy weight. So avoiding excess heat to the testicles is important, though. So think about if you're a cyclist or if you like to have very hot baths, reducing those may help your sperm to survive. Limiting your exposure to hormone-disrupting chemicals will be beneficial. Dioxins and heavy metals, especially concentrated in plastic heated foods, farmed fish, and processed meats, have been associated with reduced sperm quality and increased length of time to conceive. What can we do to optimize that? Well, vitamin E is helpful. Selenium is helpful, which you can get from Brazil nuts, just 1 or 2 a day. And coenzyme Q10 is also helpful for healthy sperm. And you can get these from nuts and seeds. A few studies have shown that an association with reduced sperm count has also been with saturated fat in the diet. So cutting back on meat and dairy, if you're a big lover of steak and cheese, may help your sperm swim to their best. Boosting vitamin D might be important because several studies have linked higher vitamin D levels with improved sperm. And there is lastly some anecdotal evidence that fenugreek might be helpful as well. So it may be worth giving that a try.